Hello, everybody. So I couldn't have asked for a better lead-in, actually. Thank you. I'm just going to start. I'll give you a quick background about me, and then I'm going to ask a couple questions, actually, while we start here. I began my career as a professor at UW-Whitewater in economics. I'm an environmental economist. So a bit of a contradiction in terms to some people, but basically, I got into environmental economics because I care passionately about the environment, probably like a lot of people in this room. And what I saw was in a lot of decision making involving the environment, the environmental values weren't being considered. And so I got into this work because basically what I do is put dollar values on the environment. Okay. And the reason I do that is to provide parity or equity with usually decision making in the public policy sphere. So my background's economics. I'm just curious in this room, how many people are like Dr. Marshall? You know, your background is in what I call the hard sciences or the real sciences, you know, biology, chemistry, you know, environmental science. How many of you are hard scientists, real scientists? Any economists? Yeah, so I am in part doing what Dr. Marshall talked about. I love coming to these types of rooms because what I'm trying to bring to people that maybe don't have an economic background is an understanding of what's possible in economics to those that maybe work primarily in the environmental side of things in terms of conservation. So I hope that's informative, and then we'll be able to continue the conversation moving forward about ways that economists, such as myself and others, might be able to support your work. So basically, this is kind of outline of the quick talk. I'm going to just give you a brief background on types of value that economists try to measure as it relates to the environment, how we do that, and then I'm going to give you a case study example because what I want to show you is how this information can be useful in crafting the type of narratives that Dr. Marshall talked about for advocacy work and for environmental decision making. How this sort of data can actually be used to inform hopefully better decision making when it comes to environmental conservation. So why does valuation of the environment matter? I think that I'm in a room where I'm probably preaching to the choir that the environment matters. Everyone here probably has a background that says we care about the environment, we care about conservation, we think that it's important, maybe intrinsically, maybe intuitively, but not everybody believes that, or at least their own self-interest may not align to just say, I'm willing to do things to protect the environment that might be costly to them individually or for their company. The challenge that we have a lot of time in the public policy making space is development comes with a very clear, very easy narrative to understand for the public and for policymakers. When you talk about developing natural areas, it's very easy to quantify jobs. It's very easy to quantify tax impacts that are raised, and it's very easy to quantify economic growth, right? Who here serves on public boards or in, you know, local town, you know, capacities? Aren't those big concerns most of the time for towns? How are we going to support our public services? What taxes are there to support them? How do we continue to promote development and growth in our community, right? When developers come and they say, we would like to do this in order to promote, you know, to promote our own business, but it's also going to promote your community. It's going to lead to growth, development, jobs. It's a very clear and compelling narrative for policymakers. So that kind of puts a bias in favor of development and maybe against environmental protection or conservation. But the reality is environmental protection has a lot of benefits associated with it too. They're just harder to measure. And so conservation creates jobs too, because it promotes recreation, it promotes tourism. You can have clean drinking water, right? And instead of having to remediate problems with your water systems because you're having to put extra money into the remediation process, you don't have to spend that money. Okay. So economic valuation basically can go in and look at the environmental side of things and say, you know what? These conservation measures also have benefits attached to them. Dollar value benefits that are important for the public, that are important for our community. And we can put a price tag on it. Some people don't like that. They don't like the idea of putting a price tag on the environment. Okay. My answer to that when I teach environmental economics, right, at UW-Whitewater, is if you do not put a price tag on the environment, you are usually implicitly valuing it at zero. And that's the problem. Okay? That's why it gets overlooked. So why valuation matters is it actually justifies investments in conservation. It justifies regulations, and you can actually measure whether you're getting a good return on your taxpayer dollars, on your private dollars in terms of the investments you're making. So I like to think of it, when I talk about this stuff, as in some sense fighting fire with fire. It's very easy on one side of things to come and talk about jobs, economic growth, and tax impacts associated with things like development. We need to be able to craft that same narrative when we're in rooms with individuals who don't deeply and intuitively value the environment simply because we think it should exist. Any questions? So that's the motivation, right? So here are the things that I kind of want to bring to your awareness, and where I'll also ask some questions. So economists, environmental economists, basically look at the environment and we say, we can establish values that individuals hold for environmental resources. And we can break down those values into a couple different categories. The main one that's really easy to understand, and I'm going to start with, is use value. Use value comes from direct engagement with the environment in most circumstances. So people place value on the environment because they can recreate on the water, right? They can boat on it, they can kayak. They place value on the environment because they can hike in a natural forest. That's direct use of the environment. There are indirect uses of the environment. You can have clean drinking water that, basically then you are consuming at a later date, but you don't have to treat it. So there's an indirect use of the environment. There's carbon sequestration that the environment engages in that's non-consumptive for us. So these direct use values are pretty easy for most people to understand, right? Because many people could see, I go out and I hike, right? How many people in this room can think of one direct use you have of the environment in terms of hiking, kayaking, bird watching, right? Everybody in the room here has some direct use of the environment. Right from that, economists can infer a dollar value you have for an environmental resource. We have techniques I'm going to show you that can allow us to do that, okay? Direct use is pretty easy. We also have existence value or non-use value, okay? Non-use value gets a little bit trickier, but it's one that I like to ask people about because I think once you think about it, most people can think, yep, I also have non-use values for the environment. So I'm going to give you an example. Many individuals receive value from the environment even when they don't directly engage with them. So option value is the dollar value an individual places on the environment for preserving the future option of using something, okay? I have never been to the Grand Canyon, but if someone came to me today, the government, whoever, and they said, would you be willing to pay any money? I'm not going to tell you the amount, any money at all, so that the Grand Canyon was not dammed on one end to create hydropower, right? So that it's available to you in the future to be able to visit and use. Would I pay any money to preserve the Grand Canyon for the future? Yes, I would. Who here has not been to the Grand Canyon? Would any of you pay any amount of money to preserve your ability to visit it in the future? Even one penny? You have option value for the Grand Canyon, okay? That's option value, right? What else do we have? We have bequest value. How many people here have children? Or maybe not their own children, but nieces, nephews, or young folks they care about. I don't. I hate children. But I don't hate your children. Okay? So I don't have children. I don't want children. But I would pay money, even my own money, to preserve resources for your children's future use of the environment. So let me ask you this. Do you, as those that have children or nieces, nephews, friends, would you pay any amount of money to preserve an environmental resource for their use, even if you will never use it? That's bequest value, okay? Last one, there's kind of two, but last one I'll talk about is existence value. This is the hardest one to measure. I'll explain why in a minute. But it's perhaps maybe the most pervasive, although hard to understand. So existence value says we as individuals, not all of us, but many of us, would pay some amount of our incomes. We place some value on simply allowing an environmental amenity or a natural resource to exist, even if we will never interact with it, even if we will never engage with it, okay, even if we will never experience it. The example I like to give in my class was there's this very ugly fish that lives way down in the depths of the ocean. And the question was, if you knew that this fish was going to go extinct, but you could spend a penny just so that you would keep it alive, right? Would you pay to preserve it, its existence? You can think of this for anything. The example I give is I will never go to the Arctic or Antarctic, I would guess, but I would pay to preserve polar bears floating out on their little ice shelves, right? Because I value knowing they exist, even if I will never interact with them directly. Can all of you say, can you think of an example where you would have existence value, a resource? Okay, there you go. That is the two types of value we can pretty easily say individuals have for environmental amenities. Use value and non-use value, very broadly, okay? Now, the key in economics is to try and estimate the total value of an environmental resource. It's simply the combination of those two values as society values it. So kind of tough, though, to determine what those values are, right? So economists in my field have worked for decades trying to refine techniques that allow us to estimate those values so that we can put them on par with the very things that you and I buy at Target or Walmart every day, trading in marketplaces. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, what are the dollar values that society as a whole puts on these resources? So we have two ways of doing it. The first is revealed preference. What we do in really short order is we look at related markets and we see how people behave in those related markets, and we can infer value based on their activity. So for example, do we have anglers in the room? Anyone in here is an angler, right? You all spend a bundle of money on boats, on rods, on hooks, all of that sort of stuff. I don't angle, but I've worked with a lot of anglers, done a lot of surveys with them. You're spending some money, right? Oh yeah. Let's not tell our partners, right? So if you look at those purchases, we can infer at a minimum the value that anglers place on their fishing experience, right? We can use those related markets to infer some value. Okay, and there's a lot of technicalities in it, but I just want to give you the broad idea. We use related markets to determine the value of things that aren't otherwise priced in the marketplace. There's a lot of ways we can do this. Do people value clean water over unclean water? If you live on a water body, let's say, for example, Lake Delavan, right? Do people pay more for houses when the water on that lake is clean and pretty, or do they pay less if it's dirty and green? They pay more, right? So we can infer the value of clean water as a natural resource based on actual market transactions in the housing market. It's called hedonic analysis. We can compare houses that have sold on clean lakes versus not clean lakes, and we can determine that clean water is worth a certain amount to people. Okay, so that's revealed preferences. People are revealing their value of the environment through related markets. Stated preference is actually basically what I just did to you a couple minutes ago. We simply go out and we ask people what they would be willing to pay for an environmental resource. Now, the key with this is it sounds easy in practice because I just asked you, how many people here would pay a penny to save the polar bears, right? How many people would pay a penny? Yes, raise your hand. Now let's just see. No, raise your hand. Anybody? All good people in here, right? There's always no's in the real world, just so you know. That's why we know we're in a self-selected group. So even for the polar bears. So that sounds easy. To do it in practice, to do it in a way that actually generates really reliable, robust data is a bit more complicated than that. There's some technicalities you have to go into, but stated preference is basically that. We go to people, we hypothetically propose a situation where you have a resource in one condition or another, and you see what are they willing to pay to get one outcome versus the other. Okay, if you do it right, you get really good data and you get really good results that basically mirror what would actually happen in the real world. Okay. Each method has its own strengths and weaknesses. Revealed preference based on actual behavior. The weakness is it can only measure use value. Okay. Stated preference, strength is it can measure any type of value. Weakness is it's based on hypothetical behavior. So you have to mitigate the incentives for people to misrepresent their values for the environment. Okay. So those are some of the techniques we have. They're really robust. They're very good. So when we have these techniques and we can estimate this value, the benefit is we're generating data that we can then use to help craft narratives for advocacy and to actually inform decision-making at local, state, and national levels that can, and I'll say this in this room, promote good environmental outcomes and conservation, because now you're suddenly talking the same language as the people in those rooms, and you're fighting fire with fire in terms of the types of jobs supported, the types of economic growth that are supported by engaging in environmental conservation and the sort of tax revenues that they generate. So I'm going to give you an example here. This is a study that we just did, UW, an environmental economist at UW-Madison, Dan Phaneuf, and myself, along with SRF Consulting Group, were asked to look at the chain of Yahara lakes. And this is just one example I'm giving you here to show you the type of information that can be created with these types of studies. And I won't go into all of the details and the technicalities, but the work was done really top-notch. And if you're interested in the full study, you can Google it and you can see all the technical details. But basically, we were asked to estimate the total economic value of this chain of lakes. And we did 3 different studies actually in one to try and get at all of these values, okay? So the first one I'll just tell you was a property value analysis. We used that hedonics that I told you to look at how clean water varied and how it impacts property values. We did a survey where we were asking people their value for changes in water quality. And then we also did a business analysis called an economic impact assessment. So long story short, the lakes themselves add about $1.2 billion to the local property base through the fact that the houses are located on those lakes. Because of that, the local economy is generating about $22.5 million additionally in taxes, right? So why is that information important, okay? The information is important because when you're talking to people in the public policy realm and you're saying, hey, should we invest in additional dredging or contamination removal, sediment removal? Should we do anything that improves the quality of the water? Should we invest in infrastructure along the beaches or on the roadways that are going to then further improve the water quality or maybe even maintain it? You can say, look, the lakes themselves provide a lot of value to the community. So let's help maintain that. There's tax taxpayer dollars in this case that could go to help support those sorts of initiatives. Doesn't mean all of them would, but at least some of them could, right? This same thing here, this same analysis tells us if the lake water quality was degraded, what the change in the property value would be and the subsequent change in the taxes. So if you talk about efforts to improve the water quality, you can look at that and you can say, okay, well, this will help maintain the property tax base and we can fund it through revenues that are actually being generated from the water quality itself. We ask people, you were saying people like to recreate, they like to go to the beaches, right? They like to go and hang out in the beaches. So we surveyed the population of Dane County, and we looked at this, and reductions in beach closures were valued at, a single beach closure was valued at $75 million in terms of the number of visits and the quality of the visit for the individuals that were going to the beaches. What does that tell you? If you invest in water quality initiatives that will reduce beach closures by one event, you're actually improving the economic outcomes in Dane County specifically by $75 million. That's a lot of money, right? When people go and they visit the beaches, they're not just visiting the beaches, are they? They're going and they're buying food and they're going on picnics. They're going and buying towels and things their kids like floaties and whatever that stuff is. And so that's what's happening. They're spending real money, right? And in some cases, like you say, they're going to the beer tent on Oberg Park, right? So they're spending real money, and on top of that, their quality of life is higher. So they're getting value from the quality of life that's in their community. What we found is just from lake-related businesses, these are lake-related businesses only, the direct effect of the lakes, the direct economic effect in terms of the amount of revenue generated is $120 million. $220 million of economic activity is generated in Dane County every year directly tied to the lakes. That's through the marinas, that's through hotels and conventions that are held specifically along the lakes, that's restaurants that are in the area, it's hotels that are staffed and full because people are coming to Madison for lake-related events or other conferences. What do you see? Top industries, 475 full-time equivalent positions are supported in hospitality because of the lakes. Restaurants, 390 full-time equivalent positions. Okay? The list goes on. So what does this tell you? When you look at this sort of data, if you're talking about a high-quality, well-functioning water body versus one that is bad and dead, there's a real economic impact to the environmental conservation that promotes that healthy lake, right? Because if you didn't have a healthy lake, people don't want to come and have conferences on the lake. They don't want to hold their events on the lake. They don't want to go boating on the lake. They don't want to kayak or swim in the lake. And so that economic activity otherwise goes away. And so you can use these sorts of numbers, this sort of data, to craft a narrative about why we should invest in conservation. So looking ahead, my purpose here was not to make you all experts in how to do this, but just to let you know, this sort of information is available and it can be created. It can be estimated by people that you all have access to in your local communities, such as myself, such as other faculty members at your local universities like Milwaukee, Carroll's here, Loyola's here. People in all these areas have this skill set. And a lot of us actually want to help. I'm ahead of schedule. As a professor, that's crazy. So we are here in a lot of circumstances to try and help because we care about these outcomes. And in a lot of cases, we donate our time and our expertise to support initiatives that can use this type of information to make progress on environmental goals. So my big point here is looking ahead. I kind of mirror what Dr. Marshall is talking about. When I talk to people in this space, I think advocacy is super important, which is what she highlighted. And I think having data to inform that advocacy can really help craft a very powerful narrative about why conservation is not just the right thing to do morally, but it's the right thing to do economically. Because when you're in rooms with a lot of these people, dollars and cents are what talks. So we, as people that care about the environment, need to learn to talk that language so that we can, in some sense, fight fire with fire. And although I'm biased towards environmental outcomes, I will say that, you're hoping that you then can actually make a better decision about what is right. Should we do something like development? Should we clean that lake or that water body up, or should we not? How do we use these dollars most efficiently? So I encourage supporting and sharing research, telling these compelling data-driven stories, and engaging with local policymakers, the media, using both the advocacy that was talked about as well as good data like this to support environmental initiatives. I will say, although I see she might have stepped out. Oh no, she's right back here. Mary Nippen, right, is town chairman in Delavan, and we actually partnered with them quite a few years ago now, 15, 20 years. And so although I have to jet after my talk, I will tell you, I was talking with her at lunch. She is the best person to sell why this sort of work matters, because we did a study for them, a Fiscal and Economic Research Center out of UW-Whitewater, did a study for them about 15, 20 years ago. And the results were used to actually support why the Lake Delavan cleanup was beneficial both ecologically and economically. And it's been a huge success. And so I think if you have questions about how this work can actually make a difference, she would be a great person to talk to because she's an example of why this works. And I think in a lot of cases, when you're in tough conversations, the data can actually help to bring people together because it kind of gives you a common sense of what's occurring, and you can move forward from there. When you have data on the dollars and cents on both sides of things, a lot of times you can find win-win situations where everybody can actually walk away better. So with that, I will yield the balance of my time, and I will just say thank you very much for having me here. If you do have any questions on this or you'd like to reach out, I'll leave a couple cards up at the front desk, but you can certainly find me at UW-Whitewater. My name is Matt Winden, and don't hesitate to email. I'll be happy to help you in any way that I can in this space. Have a good rest of the day.